The city, famous for its bridges, canals, and architecture, has over time almost become synonymous with flooding, and the floods have gotten worse recently. To combat this, the city spent billions on a special defense system featuring premier engineering to stop the water problem forever. But everything hasn't quite gone to plan, with it being far more expensive than earlier thought and taxed with decades-long delays. Not to mention the corruption, environmental concerns, and questions about whether it'll be effective in the long term. This story is one every coastal city should pay heed to as we move into the future. Venice was built in the middle of a lagoon, and so has been vulnerable to a phenomenon known as acqua alta, or high water, since its inception 6 centuries ago. The high tides, low atmospheric pressure, and strong winds always result in flooding, and has been like that since the 15th century. But now, the problem has gotten out of hand. 2019 saw the worst flood in over 50 years, with 80% of the city underwater. Pair this with today's more extreme weather, global warming, and the fact that the city is gradually sinking anyway, and you've got a good reason to pack your bags and say sayonara. Enter the $7 billion flood brigade called the Mosaic system. It's finally up and running, and it only took 40 years from the conception of its design. It's made up of 78 gates, each 20 meters wide, and they rise out of the water when flooding is about to occur. The barriers are located at 3 points along the coast that borders the Adriatic. The 2 lower inlets, Malamocco and Chioggia, have 1 barrier each, while Lido in the north has 2, with a new artificial island filling the gap between them. When not in use, the gates are filled with water and submerged underwater in concrete casings that allow boats to pass overhead. Compressed air is pushed into the gates to raise them. This forces the water out and allows the gates to rotate on its huge 42-ton hinges. Once upright, they form a barrier high enough to block even the highest tidal waters, up to 3 meters high. They are designed to be effective even if sea levels rise by 60 centimeters in the future. Once the tide passes, the gates are refilled and turned back to the closed position. They take half an hour to raise and 15 minutes to lower. Each barrier has multiple gates that can be controlled separately, which allows for flexibility depending on the size of the tide. The Mosaic system is cool enough, but what's really impressive from a construction point of view are the actual housings for the gates. These massive structures that weigh many thousands of tons each were manufactured in 3 separate locations before being dropped into huge trenches in the seabed. There are also 2 shoulder casings at all 4 barriers that connect the housings to the mainland. With these, workers can operate the system's inner mechanisms via service galleries that run underneath each barricade. At Chioggia, the casings were constructed at a dry dock which was filled with water, making the structures buoyant-like. Boats with huge cranes were then used to pull the casings to their resting place. At Malamocco, the units were moved on massive rolling platforms mounted on tracks. A crane then lifted the structures into the water for barges and tugboats to take them away. When lowering the casings, hydraulic dampers were used to absorb the impact of these huge structures hitting the seabed. Some boats can come and go, even if the gates are up. Okay, we've said all that, but does it actually work? In 2020, the Mosaic system successfully defended against a 1-meter high tide and has done so multiple times. But it hasn't been all unicorns and rainbows. In the same year, the system wasn't able to stop an unusually high tide and the city was flooded once again. But that's only because authorities failed to turn it on. Really, guys? Its final cost is 4 billion euros more than what was originally thought, and it takes 100 million euros per year to maintain the system. Environmentalists have raised opposition, stating that holding back water in this way could lead to depleted oxygen levels for the sea's ecosystem. This only gets worse as sea levels rise. Many question if it's as effective as older and less expensive systems like the Rotterdam system. Whether you like it or not, the city of Venice depends on it, and it works, at least for now. And it serves as an example to build upon for other coastal cities around the globe. If you like this video and love to hear all about the mega projects of the world, be sure to subscribe to the channel. Click a video on the screen to watch something you haven't seen. And thanks for visiting Built a Billion.